Welcome to Making Change, a podcast to understand current events and explore how to make positive changes in ourselves and the world. I am your host, Mark Gopin, Director of CRDC, Professor, and Practitioner of Conflict Healing at George Mason University. The title of today's episode is Who Really Crashed the Dali Giant Cargo Ship into the Francis Scott Key Bridge and Why? Antidotes to Bad Information. Now, the fact is that I described this episode in this particular way with this particular question because I wanted to emphasize the toxic effects on the mind of information that comes to us that emphasizes who as opposed to what, as opposed to why. In other words, one of the main sources of bad information that confuses us, that gaslights us, and that needs to be counteracted is questions that are always asking in the title, who's done this and who's done that and who's responsible? The fact of the matter is that I live not far from the site of the Francis Scott Key Bridge collapsing, and it was a very sad event and very frightening at first when I woke up and realized that this had happened in the middle of the night, just an hour away from me, a bridge that I had crossed many times. I was immediately worried about how many people had died, and so far it seems to be at least 6. They're not 100% sure. The Dali is the name of the cargo ship, and it was chartered by shipping giant Maersk and operated by Synergy Marine Group. It hit the Francis Scott Key Bridge after leaving the port of Baltimore very quickly. And the question is, why did it happen? And who was responsible? Immediately, there's been investigations by the Department of Transportation, the Safety Board of the Department of Transportation. But here's the most important point in terms of our future as a country and as a nation, as the American people. And that is that immediately this event was seized upon by a highly profitable social media structure that is built on extremism, particularly on X, formerly known as Twitter, but really a host of different platforms. And here's what they came up with without knowing a single fact. They immediately said it was terrorism. They immediately said it was the Jewish people. They immediately said that it was the diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI programs that were responsible. They immediately said that it was anti-white business practices that caused this disaster. And then Alex Jones, conspiracy theorist, found guilty of horrible hurt to people in court, wrote that the collision was the deliberate act of World War III that's already started. Okay, and as Heather Cox Richardson, a brilliant historian and analyst, reports, in the name of technology reporter Taylor Lorenz, who studies social media patterns, this is called engagement farming. This is the practice of posting extremist comments to generate attention, which can then be monetized by getting a cut of advertising that appears near those comments. These comments then generate thousands of dollars. In other words, this is doing two things at once to the American culture and situation. It is poisoning our minds, and it's generating enormous profits. And the reason why I made the title of this episode so provocative, who really crashed the Dali Giant cargo ship into the Francis Scott Key Bridge and why, is because I wanted to demonstrate, for those of you who selected this, that moment in your mind when you thought to yourself, oh, maybe there's somebody behind this that I didn't know about, that's not being reported by the news, and I'm a little bit nervous. So I have to tell you the truth. When I first saw the news of this, barely awake on that morning after the crash, the first thought I had is maybe they discovered a new approach to terrorism, because I live in fear of terrorism. Like a lot of Americans, I have a vivid memory of 9/11 and of the fact that we couldn't believe it at first. It had to be an accident, and then it turns out it was deliberate. So when something this big happens with a very big ship and a very big bridge, you immediately wonder what's going on. Well, the details came out for those who took the time to start studying and collecting the data from different news reports, even within hours, even within minutes. It was very plain that they were 90% sure to conclude that this was a terrible accident, and that this was an accident based on a loss of propulsion system, a loss of electricity, a signal of mayday from the crew, so many things that indicated that this was accidental and not done on purpose. That's number one. And number two, it seems that it's not entirely clear that this was negligence. It's going to be part of the investigation, because the ship was cited for a violation of on the propulsion system at one point in the past. No idea at this point whether it was corrected or not. And some of the ratings for the ship are fair in terms of its performance. I mean, there's many things that will go into the investigation, especially because tragically 6 people have died, and millions and millions of dollars have been lost in the needed for reconstruction of the bridge, the loss of revenue to the port of Baltimore, and many businesses. So this will evoke major scrutiny, and already has. And by all indications of every report coming in from different sources, the moves on this to investigate have been very professional, very quick, involving the Secretary of Transportation himself, who went to oversee the investigation immediately. Everything about this success suggests that this is a professional investigation into a tragic situation that definitely suggests, like many other ship incidents, that globally we need to double down on the amount of incidents that occur because a ship is not up to par, or because it escaped a proper investigation of some part. This is not an instance of bad infrastructure of the United States or poor planning of bridges. No bridge, according to the more recent reports, would have survived such a massive amount of energy from a massive ship hitting at about 9 miles an hour into one of the foundations of the bridge. It just simply would have to collapse. So all of this is very important information, but it teaches us something very important. One is that the toxic nature of half-truths and misinformation, in terms of evoking fear and hatred, is a very real and present danger within the human psyche. All of us can act badly and think badly because of half-truths and half-information. At the same time, half-truths and half-information is temporarily inescapable. It's inescapable if you train your mind in two things. One is come from the field of ethics and culture, and that's training yourself in humility. And the second thing is if you train yourself in the most basic scientific discipline. the most important thing about a scientific discipline are the words, I don't know. Are the words, it may be 50% true, or maybe it's 70% true, or we have 90% assurance that this is what happened, but not 100% assurance, and that the investigation will go on for a very long time, the interviews with survivors and so on. So there are two things that people get used to in a civil society when they do not want to upend that civil society like Alex Jones, when they do not want to capitalize on tragedy in order to make a few bucks. And that is that they ask a lot of questions, they remain humble, they bring in professionals of a wide variety, they bring in oversight of those professionals, they spend the money on finding out the rights and wrongs that were done in order to understand
of a
how
situation,
this happened, and more importantly,
where we can learn
how
a lot
it can be
from
prevented in the future.
the basic
That
things
is how
that
a
have come
professional
out
society
as
operates. That's how an ethical
improving
society
our
operates.
ability
And in terms
to
of the human mind,
prevent
that is how a
misinformation
humble
from poisoning our
mind
minds.
with the most
So
basic
one of these
commitment
is
to science
education.
operates.
Educating
And that is with
ourselves
some degree
to
of
evaluate
uncertainty
sources of
until
information.
you know more and
And
more
that means
and more,
usually
so
that you
that
want
you
to
become more and
look
more
at many
certain
news outlets
of
when
what
something
actually
happens. You don't want to
happens
look at just
and
one.
what
You
needs
want
to happen
to,
in terms of
and you don't want to
prevention
look at
of
all of them
any
with one slant.
accident
You want to
or
look
tragedy
at
that comes
NBC
down
and
the road.
ABC and NPR
Now,
and
this
BBC
is an
and the
example.
Guardian and the Washington Post, and you just get a whole bunch of different writers in there and reporters, and then you start to get a sense of balance. You also have a right and a responsibility to look for some sources and some writers that may have some biases. And you want to balance that precisely by seeing a wide variety of sources coming out. You want to see video evidence. You want to see witnesses on the ground, but you don't want to rely on any one witness or any one video to tell you what's really going on. All of these things will help you improve your source credibility. And it also encourages critical thinking. And the basic thing I said about critical thinking before, critical thinking is this abstract phrase that you're going to hear a lot when people talk about education. But what is critical thinking? Critical thinking means that you can sit back and be humble and say, I don't know. I need to find out. I will not believe one person, especially if they're screaming at me, especially if they're hating on people. And I'm going to be skeptical of that because there's such a bad history to people using partial information to hate on somebody, to scapegoat somebody, to target somebody, and also to sell snake oil. Okay? So encouraging critical thinking is just that. It's the ability to investigate on your own with many, many sources and to immediately be suspicious if somebody tells you exactly what's happening in a very big way and there's somebody to blame. It's especially those who questions. Who did this? Be suspicious if that's the first question people ask. What you want to go after is people who are investigating what happened, what questions, how questions, why questions. But if the first thing they do is try to target the president, any president, if the first thing they do is try to target any official, you better be skeptical because you need the facts. You need to focus on what. And then there are more and more fact-checking organizations around that just Google fact-checking organizations, fact-checking web pages, start to learn to fact check. This is also an opportunity to support good journalists, start to get to know who actually tells you consistently what is mostly true based on the evidence that they bring. Become aware of your own biases. I'll give an example. Like I said, when I first woke up on that day, with this event. I got very afraid. It's just an hour from me, and it looked like it could have been terrorism, because it's such an everyday occurrence that the ships and the bridges coordinate together, and I couldn't imagine such a big ship leaving port just within an hour, so nobody's really asleep, and suddenly goes right into a major bridge. And I said, oh my gosh, I hope that somebody didn't take charge of that in order to do this on purpose. So I have personal reasons why I'm particularly sensitive to and hurt by the effects of terrorism in the world, but that's my cognitive bias. And I immediately said I have to check myself. I have to know that this is the truth, and this is not something just coming from my emotions, wanting to find something in the world that is confirmation bias. And that's another important word, is when something I'm looking to confirm an opinion I already have. That's not science. That's not ethical. That is a narcissistic way in which I'm imposing myself on the world. Each one of us, through self-examination, which is the first and most important step in my Healing the Heart of Conflict 8 steps of peacemaking and peacemaking with yourself. You can look that up. It's a very inexpensive book that I've kept purposely inexpensive on Amazon. Healing the Heart of Conflict, and that um, awareness of your own cognitive biases comes from self-examination. And that is the most important step you can have to not only be an ethical person, not only to have less conflict in your life, less hatred in your life, but also to be a better scientist, to really be a better scientist. There's no good science without self-examination. And then there's the other issue about using technology wisely. Many social media constructs like X, or formerly Twitter, are designed to take you down rabbit holes. And rabbit holes means that you keep clicking and clicking, and you get into weirder and weirder universes that are untrue and complete fabrications. So you use technology wisely, and you realize that if you're going down a hole where everything sounds the same and everything is kind of bizarre, you've gone down the wrong path on using your technology. And you want to make a discipline in your life to use your technology wisely. You want to encourage transparency. You want to encourage truth telling. You want to participate with other people in getting educated. You want to share things in careful ways after you have really vetted it and you've really looked at it. But it is really hard to think straight sometimes, and think quickly when you're on the run, say, in between appointments, or suddenly a bad thing happens, or you just woke up out of bed and you're scared and you think of a terrible tragedy or the worst possible scenario, because you're still emotional, you're still in that dream state where we are more primitive in some ways in our feelings. So the real key to all of this is the use of your own brain, that sacred part of you that is unique in the universe. We don't know of any other species that has quite the mind we do. And our mind does terrible things, but it also has an amazing capacity to discover the truth globally and across the universe. But that brain is a powerful weapon too. And you have to get used to two things: one from ethics and one from culture, and one from science. So it's ethics and culture or science. And that is humility. Getting used to the fact that you don't know everything. Getting comfortable with that. Not being frightened by that. And then saying my life and my relationship with others is about learning. It's about learning from others what I don't know, and never assuming based on one source and one person who's spewing hate and incitement that suddenly I know the truth about the world. We have to teach this to every child in every classroom at the earliest age. in order to become a more responsible species on this planet, in order to have a society that can flourish. And I earnestly believe that we are in an early stage of advanced civilization, and that with our efforts to train our own minds, we can make change and make positive change in much better ways with each other, with a certain level of humility and eagerness to learn everything, not just half-truths, and not certainly trust people who are making billions of dollars manipulating our opinions. So that's what I wanted to say today about antidotes to bad information.
Thank you for joining me on Making Change, a podcast to understand current events and explore how to make positive changes in ourselves and the world. I am your host, Mark Gopin. Please check out my recent book, Compassionate Reasoning, Changing the Mind to Change the World, Oxford University Press. Also check out Healing the Heart of Conflict, 8 Crucial Steps to Making Peace with Yourself and Others. Plug those titles into Google with the words Mark Gopin and books. Please see our Facebook page, Making Change with Dr. Mark Gopin, and website, markgopin.com. Blessings to you today for a healthy mind and body, for safety and for a flourishing life. For personal consultations and coaching, please contact me at gopinmark@gmail.com. See you again soon.